Welcome back to the Introduction to the Massachusetts Professional Standards for Teachers of Adult ESOL. This is Part 3 in a 3-part video series. Parts 1 and 2 provided an overview of the standards and the revisions made to the recent edition, and took a close look at each of the 7 standards. In Part 3, we focus on what you can do with the standards to be a more effective teacher. There are several ways you can make use of the ESOL professional standards. Here are 4. You can read the document with colleagues and use it as a jumping-off point for discussions. You can use it as a professional development tool, beginning with a self-assessment. Because there are effective instructional practices identified, you can use the standards to help guide classroom observation. And finally, you can use the standards as a guide to curriculum development and instructional planning. All of these professional standards encourage teachers' professional growth. So let's take a look at each one more closely. Let's begin with a professional study. Professional study is when a small group of educators get together to read and discuss a selected text or sections of a text, guided by the question, how will this text influence my professional practices and the practices in my program? In general, you conduct a professional book study by deciding what you want to focus on. In the case of the ESOL professional standards, you could read the whole document or one of the standards in particular. This will depend, of course, on your and your colleagues' goal or goals, or the needs in your program. For example, you and some colleagues may want to devote time to learning more about culturally responsive and sustaining teaching, and so you would read and discuss Standard 3. Or if your program is working on your curriculum, then your group would read Standard 4. Once you've made that decision of what to focus on, you and your colleagues could commit to reading either individually or during staff meeting time, depending upon your program resources. And as with any kind of study, it helps to take notes, write questions, and your reflections and comments while reading in order to prepare the group discussion. Then you meet with colleagues and talk about the reading. Of course, it is helpful to have norms and protocols established by the group so that these discussions are productive and beneficial for everyone involved. Most importantly, the discussion should always circle back to the question, how will this reading influence my teaching? And at some point, everyone commits to trying out something new in their practice. It helps to focus on a particular practice and to have a way to assess whether or not you are successful in implementing it. This is where the ESOL professional standards can be very useful, in that they provide specific strategies, tools, and techniques that teachers can use to try out. And then the group discusses how successful they were with their implementation of the new practice and make recommendations for moving forward. These might include recommendations for the program to adopt. Professional study is effective because it is a self-directed and task-centered study. As we know from the adult learning theory, adults learn best when they have some control over their learning and when it serves a purpose. For example, when it is job embedded, so that new learning can be immediately applied in the classroom. Professional learning offers a supportive environment for teachers to talk with colleagues on professional issues, so it promotes professionalism and an interest in evidence-based practices, educational theory, policy, and in this case, the standards. It offers an opportunity for teachers to constructively contribute to their program's goals, and of course the goal of any professional learning is to have a positive impact on student learning. So through professional studies, teachers can use the ESOL professional standards as professional development. You can use the ESOL professional standards for professional development and planning. You can do this by using the self-assessment tool available on the SABES or ACLS website. This is a very short set of 21 questions, 3 per standard, that will give you a rough sense of your relative strengths and weaknesses regarding the standards. For a more accurate sense of your relative strengths and weaknesses, you can also use the document itself to self-assess. By perusing the supporting explanations and the indicators of knowledge and sample applications, you would either recognize terms and concepts or not. And if not, one could read further into the document and/or decide to peruse more formal professional development. For example, this graphic is copied and pasted directly from Standard 2, the Components of Language, that not only identifies each of the components by its linguistic terms, but also notes why the component is helpful for students to know. You might look at this chart and know with confidence that this is a strength of yours. Conversely, you might look at it and realize that, I don't often teach metalinguistic awareness, or I don't even know what pragmatics is, and then think that perhaps you could use some professional development on the components of language. Similarly, here is another example from Standard 6, which identifies several effective ESOL teaching practices. You can use Standard 6 to ask yourself to what extent you include content that is culturally responsive, contextualize language in authentic contexts, include activities that foster critical thinking, make content accessible to all learners, use the gradual release of responsibility model, provide communicative and collaborative learning opportunities, limit your talk in the classroom, correct students' errors judiciously, and depending on your answers, look into steps that you could use to improve. In addition to using the ESOL professional standards for self-assessment, you can also use them as a guide for classroom observation. While the standards weren't designed to be a classroom observation guide per se, they are written in concrete language, which makes them a helpful tool when looking for observable practices in the classroom, particularly the section on what effective ESOL teachers do in the Know and Do chart in each standard. Here is an example from Standard 1 on the principles of second language acquisition. The standard statement reads, "The ESOL teacher understands current theories and principles of second language acquisition and applies this knowledge to promote adult learners' English language development." That is not easily observable in the classroom as written. So in the chart of indicators of knowledge and sample applications, this abstract statement is brought down to a more concrete level. Shown here on the left is one indicator of SLA knowledge. Language acquisition is enhanced when the learners are engaged in meaningful communication in authentic contexts. That's better, but still fairly abstract. But when you look in the right-hand column under Sample Applications, you will see examples of what this knowledge looks like when applied in the classroom. For example, you would see a teacher contextualize language learning and meaningful content relevant to their lives rather than relying on language points predetermined by a textbook. And you would see a teacher develop activities that require learners to use authentic language to solve real-life problems or situations they may encounter outside of the classroom. For example, applying for healthcare, searching job or career websites, interviewing a job, or advocating for themselves or a family member in a variety of situations. You might also see a teacher facilitating group or pair activities, student collaboration, and peer teaching to maximize student-to-student interaction and minimize teacher-to-student interaction. You can see how these examples could be used as look-fors in the classroom. The ESOL professional standards can also be useful for curriculum and instruction planning in two ways. One is by reviewing Standard 4 on curriculum and instructional planning. And the other is to use the standards as a checklist to make sure that key elements are present in your curriculum. Let's take a look at Standard 4 first. You might remember from the previous video that Standard 4 provides some guidance for curriculum development by describing a useful planning process, specifically the use of backward design, which starts with planning end goals, followed by assessments and then activities aligned to those goals, and that this process is ongoing, revisited and revised regularly as the makeup of your students change. This process helps create a cohesive and coherent structure to your instructional design plans described in Standard 4, with each part of the curriculum aligned to each other both within and across class levels, and that the structure is designed appropriately for both in-person and online courses. Standard 4 also describes the content of an effective ESOL instructional plan for both in-person and online classes that is relevant, rigorous, and engaging for all learners. So by reading through Standard 4, you will have a clear idea of what effective ESOL curriculum and instruction planning looks like. In addition, you can use all of the standards as a guide or checklist for your curriculum development by asking yourself, are your instructional plans aligned to the SLA principles in Standard 1? Are the components of language being addressed adequately and appropriately? Is the curriculum as culturally responsive as it could be? Is culture built into the curriculum so that it is sustained? Does your curriculum meet the standard as it is laid out in Standard 4? Are you including enough assessments before, during, and after instruction in your plans? Are the activities in your unit and lesson plans consistent with the key effective and evidence-based practices described in Standard 6? And finally, are your colleagues cultivating a reflective practice that would allow you to regularly improve your curriculum and instruction? This leads us to Standard 7, Professional Growth. This standard summarizes the way an educator can grow professionally to be a more effective teacher and to improve learner outcomes. The ESOL teacher engages in a continuous improvement process that includes ongoing reflection, self-assessment, goal setting, and high-quality professional development in order to gain greater teaching expertise, develop new instructional practices, increase learner engagement, and improve student outcomes. We hope that from having watched this video, you are now able to use the ESOL professional standards to help you with your professional growth, as a guide to self-assessment, reflection, and professional development, as a learning tool, and as a guide for instructional planning. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions about the ESOL professional standards or professional development, please contact the SABE's Curriculum and Instruction PD Center for ESOL at any time.